Hello and welcome to Hugging the Snug. We are joined today by Philipp Rode, Executive Director of LEC Cities at London School of Economics, and we are here today to talk about cities as they are the 21st century's challenges and opportunities of this era. Please, Philipp. We need to give each other a hug.
Thank you for having me. So, you were going to ask me a specific question.
70% of the projected population is going to live in cities, and what kind of challenges our cities will have to face considering the amount of population growth and the strain of this population growth is going to have on resources and on infrastructures. What are your thoughts on it?
So here we're back to cities as a problem, or urban development as a problem, but also a solution. And I need to definitely also stress the solution bit. But let's start with the problem. Certainly up until today, traditional, conventional urbanization had a strong relationship with a range of very desirable outcomes: improvement in health, improvement in productivity, getting wealthier, better educated, but also, and that is the problem, a significant increase in the use of non-renewable resources, contributing to climate change, water pollution, local air pollution. So a whole range of environmental bads have been associated with this increase in urban living, urban productivity, and urban economics. And that's something which one needs to take very serious, and I'll come to that, turn around into something where we are sticking to the positive products of cities, but we are getting rid of those that have been problematic. And in an interesting way, cities, I think, more than most other settlement patterns, and probably also more than most other economic development opportunities, have that opportunity. Because one of the reasons why cities have been so successful is because they are creating efficiencies for personal interaction, efficiencies for producing health outcomes, efficiencies for a whole range of positive outcomes. And one of those potentially can also be energy efficiency, carbon efficiency. So here you have a real win-win opportunity. If you do urban development strategies in the right way, in an appropriate way, you can take advantage of that.
But here you're pointing out one of the most difficult side of cities. You were speaking about improving cities. So I see this as a trend that is much easier to do in the Western world. So where cities have already been developed in the last 150 years, and here we are going in, making them more efficient, more energy efficient, carbon efficient. But what is happening throughout the world, where we see that the majority of the population growth is not taking place here, it's taking place in India, in China, in South America, in Brazil. What is going to happen if you don't have an urban design that you can study before actually applying the various different infrastructures before? What do you think is going to happen in the next 20, 30 years?
Absolutely right. I mean, there is... we need to be careful here, because there are certain solutions of how to deal with cities which are mature in OECD country contexts, which have created a certain threshold level of wealth where you then can take care of beautiful neighborhood parks, nice street design, good housing, and so on. That's, of course, far from realities which we are seeing today in urbanizing China, in urbanizing India, Sub-Saharan Africa, broadly those regions which are really still in this process of accommodating a massive amount of new populations in cities, and as well as urban areas. Now, there is one assumption, which is we have a strong priority in those regions of poverty reduction, and that's absolutely right and essential. But the assumption goes even further, and it's sort of arguing that therefore one needs to go through a certain cycle of energy intensity and also carbon intensity. Now, that has actually been challenged by some who would argue that no, you don't necessarily have to go through exactly the same cycle of sort of first becoming dirty with a lot of coal, a lot of cheap energy.
Let me just jump in. I'm a supporter of that school of thought, but here I have to ask your personal opinion. What do you think? Do you think that they will have to go through carbon and carbon intense ways to develop cities as they are cities? Or do you think we can skip a step and actually implement?
I mean, I happen to believe that there is an opportunity to bypass some of the negative cycles which we have been going through in Western cities. Obviously, I would say that. Now,
you never know.
That's true, but I think I would make the difference here between what you would traditionally argue at a national economy level and what you can see in cities. One concrete example. Take the transport system. So our objective is to reduce poverty, create a certain level of social equity, and we are confronted with a range of different transport solutions in a developing world city. Let's take Mumbai.
Okay.
And I would argue that if your overall goal is one of healthy economic growth that is also equitable, and that is at the same time also relatively resource efficient and doesn't compromise on those long-term carbon issues and climate change issues, you would certainly want to invest in, number one, the ability of people to be able to walk in the city. A very simple means of connecting in cities. We all appreciate it, we all know it, it's very important for us as social human beings, but also for us as healthy human beings. Immobility, sitting around, is a problem in itself, so we want to avoid that. It's a cheap way of doing it, everyone will profit, therefore that will be a number one priority. Pedestrian environments, improving those. Another big priority is then obviously public transport. Public transport will immediately allow you to bring in an enormous capacity for movement, much more than any other transport mode. You can really move hundreds of thousands of people with relatively contained infrastructure lines, and you can make provisions that these new connectivities are used for a whole range of different income groups and therefore make the city more equitable. The last thing you want to do in these contexts, and that's very unfortunate because what we are seeing is to a large extent exactly that tendency, but the last thing you want to do in those contexts is to prioritize both in terms of how much space you dedicate and how much budget you dedicate to private motorized modes, i.e. car use, and thereby support individual automobility, which is hugely problematic and takes away not only environmental opportunities, not only social opportunities, it takes away economic growth opportunities.
Absolutely. I'm going to come back with 3 points to these points and then we have to wrap up and finish this interview. But just some thoughts to go away with. The first one was, you said, people love to walk. Of course we love to walk, but how, when we see the trends of cities, we're talking always about mega cities, so even bigger spaces. So even in London, it's complicated to walk from home to work because it's just too much space. So it's difficult to go around and plan cities where walking distance is actually available because of the size of cities. The second thing is public transport. So public transport, I think we all agree, it's fundamental, it's easier, it saves energy, yes, all of the pros. That also requires a very strong leadership at the government level or at the city level, which in most developing countries is difficult to achieve prior to the development of the city itself. And the third thing is private mode of transport, which you can see it in China, you can see it in many different countries, where unfortunately, through these ideas of development, where everybody is, in order to showcase my well-being, I will have to have a car, that comes up, spurs up just an incredible amount of questions.
Gaia, let me respond to those 3 points. On the first, it's quite important to acknowledge that yes, of course, this distance between where you work and where you live happens to be the longest, and for that, of course, to take advantage of a metropolitan economy, you need motorized transport in most cases. But what most people don't appreciate, that the amount of kilometers spent in a city only for work and the commuting is actually only a very small amount of the travel that happens in cities. it's in the region of 20 to 25%, even in US American cities. Number of trips, it's often even below 20%. So what are all these other trips? They are trips related to education, children, shopping, all sorts of health-related trips. And most of those have a very strong relationship with your immediate environment in cities, or at least they can. You know, a lot of those jobs you can create these efficiencies where you might enable, and there are cities where people are enabled to make these trips walking. So
you have to give me at least one example. Now that you said that there are cities, please.
Cities which facilitate that proximity. I mean, the best example is probably Hong Kong,
okay,
which is a city which has an incredibly good health record. And one reason is that the availability, the physical availability of health centers and healthcare is so strong. I mean, almost all people in Hong Kong live within walking distance to a very good healthcare facility. That's just one example. On your second point on public transport, you're absolutely right. You need very strong institutions to deal with public transport. But, you know, at the same time, to build major road construction projects, to regulate traffic flows, that's also not an easy task.
No.
And I would argue that some of the reasons why the capacities might be even better in sort of road building strategies is once again because that's where budgets are spent rather than invested in efficient and good public transport. So there's sort of a chicken and an egg problem because you're not investing, therefore also you have less of a governmental capacity. Your last point is probably the most challenging one, that car use is of course a very desirable thing. But it's also something that is generated by political frameworks. It's made artificially cheap to start with. A lot of the roads are subsidies, are based on subsidies. A lot of even the vehicles and the fuel they use are subsidized. And then there is a whole industry which specializes on exactly making this product the most desirable thing in the world. So desirable that a lot of people spend one day of their week working only on a product which they cannot even use for more than 5% of the time. So if I would ask you, whether you're living in Mumbai or Beijing, to think about what you could spend your money on if it is not a car, I think we are entering very interesting territory. It's a lot of money you can spend on something else. Go traveling, go to the movies, go to good restaurants on a regular basis, take taxis, take public transport, buy your kids wonderful designed educational toys. I think that's a conversation which is very important. The car ownership has an enormous amount of opportunity costs. You're spending a hell of a lot of money on it. And what you could do with that money instead as an individual consumer is something which we need to become much more aware of, whether we live in London or whether we're in Beijing or in Sao Paulo.
Well, Philipp, thank you very much for coming into Hug in the Snug. This is all, and have a nice evening.